Hello, my name is Patrick Chopson. I'm one of the co-founders at Cove Tool. I'm really interested to talk to you guys today about some of the things that can really help with implementing technology in your firm. Now, one of the really cool things about the project delivery and knowledge community is that we have the ability to think about a little bit more strategically, think about ways that we can actually apply technology to your firm. And we're going to get into some of the practical steps that you can really take to make that happen. Now, I know a lot of the stuff that you guys have probably thought about before is, you're trying to buy software, you're trying to maybe implement a new process for how to get building permits, or you're trying to think about how do I deliver this project in a way that it comes in under budget, or there's a lot of different concerns that we have. And certainly in the field right now, everything's changing. There's a lot of really cool applications out there or ways of thinking about it. And a lot of times it can be easy to kind of get it caught up in the hype, or to not do anything at all because it's just too difficult to know all the different things that you have to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down how we think about this. So because I run a technology startup, we've had to do things where we had to scale quickly, or we've had to get new customers, or we've had to think about those things. And as a licensed architect myself, I've been really curious to kind of learn about how those things work and in the technology space, and think about how I can apply that. So I did run my own architecture practice for a while, did about 200 homes and light commercial projects in Atlanta, Georgia, which is in the United States. And also kind of like in that time, we had to think a lot about how do we deliver these projects in a really quick timeline. My firm was new. I couldn't charge a lot of money, so I had to figure out other ways to achieve profitability and things like that. And so one of the things that came down to was creating a process for how we do things, understanding how we do the work that we do, and then deciding if we need technology to help with that or if we need a process to help with that. So by process, what I mean is, like, let's say you're going to do a permit for a building, and there's a checklist that you should probably be following in your firm. Some people have checklists, some don't, but for young staff members, that can be a really effective way of delivering projects on time. However, organizing all that or ensuring consistent project delivery can be a super big challenge when you have people of different backgrounds or different ways of thinking, or and all those things like that. So you really want to, as much as possible, try to create a consistent workflow, document what you're doing, and that becomes especially critical when you're looking to make a big investment in terms of technology into your company. Now, the first step is obviously to understand what you're currently doing. And one of the ways that we can do that is to document how much time that we're spending on different tasks. But it kind of goes beyond that to start thinking about like the unit economics of what you're doing. So if you're running like a tech startup or a software company or any other company, a lot of times you would actually know down to the hour how long it takes for someone to do something in your company. And then you would figure out ways to deliver that same service at a more profitable level. That's how most people are able to achieve profitability gains. But in architecture and engineering, a lot of times we just tend to throw more hours at the project. We end up working more than 40 hours. And a lot of architects like to complain that architecture is not profitable, and sometimes it isn't. But a lot of times that comes down to inefficient workflows, inefficient tools, ways that we're doing things that don't make a lot of sense. So the question I always like to ask people is, what would happen if you told people that they could only work 40 hours a week at your firm? And for some people that may sound crazy, because it's like, well, we're doing art, we'll work an infinite amount of time on it, which is great, but you might want to work an infinite amount of time on design and not on like documentation or saving files or having to resave stuff for a sub-consultant, things like that. So what you want to do first is think about, like, if you were going to work 40 hours a week for every single person in the office, and what if you tied their pay to how much profit you were making? That's the thing that I think a lot of architects don't think about. It's the old school way of working is we hire people, we pay them maybe as less as we can, we get new interns or AXP professionals from school, and we go about trying to work them a lot of hours, is what some people will do. I don't necessarily think that's a great idea, which is why I got into the whole technology space and automation and things like that. But I think it's a really important point if you want to be more profitable as a business, if you want to really go out there and achieve a little bit of more work-life balance. Technology is an important part of that. As we've all seen the pandemic, it is possible to change what you're doing overnight, work from home, work remotely, which has really helped firms out in terms of productivity gains from just that alone. The 30-minute meeting become a thing instead of the 1-hour meeting. Those are all examples of like quick wins that certainly we've been able to achieve lately, but there's a whole lot more out there. Over the past 30 years, there's a really big saying out there that it's only 1 to 2% productivity gain over a 20-year period, while other people are achieving 10, 20, even 30% productivity gains in other industries. So we, as architects, there's definitely something wrong with what we're doing if we can't achieve productivity with technology. As we've seen, BIM workflows end up taking about the same time. We're asked to document a lot of information. That information is not being well processed, so we actually have to recreate every single project, the information from the previous project. So kind of with that framework in mind, let's think about what we could do if we could only work 40 hours. What are the things that we would do? What things could we automate? In larger firms, there is a focus on doing research as part of your practice, that practice-driven research. Sometimes in smaller firms or medium-sized firms or even other large firms, no one really does that thought about what it is that we're doing. So we all know we're on really tight deadlines. So instead of trying to do a survey of everyone in the office and getting all these different conflicting ideas, it's a lot better to pursue a much more rigorous workflow for determining, how do we figure out what it is that we're doing. So you really want to start to identify what are the tasks that are not core to the design process. So if I'm sketching a cool concept, that's core to the design process. We would definitely want to do that. However, maybe saving a file, that's not core to the design process, or remodeling something from SketchUp into another BIM tool like Revit or something. Maybe that's not core to the design process. So we want to figure out how do we remove those translation layers, those barriers that cause us to have to do more work. Or let's say you're going to invoice someone. How many steps does it take to go from I need to invoice that person to I create an invoice, I send it to accounting sends that person, sends the check back. There's a lot of little pieces there that are probably unnecessary and could be automated. Or maybe if you use a different solution for your payroll processing, it wouldn't take you as much time to analyze payroll or to do things like that. So try to think about all the little pieces that you might need. Of course, something like building simulations, which I'm an expert in. The less time that you have to have expert people rethinking the wheel each time, obviously the better that's going to be in terms of being able to deliver simulations continuously rather than 1 or 2 times. So that's kind of like a thought in my mind, but you can start to apply the same thing to any aspect of your business. So kind of with that in mind, another thing you really want to consider too is how do you get work? So a lot of times we think about, I just got to talk to so-and-so, I got to do this pitch, I got to do that. And we're kind of going from one project to the next on a treadmill without thinking about what are the steps that it took to win that work? What are the things that I'm doing? How long does it take me to do a pitch? Because if I can pitch 10 times instead of 5, statistically you're just going to win more work because you can do more pitches. So understanding how you create inbound work for yourself and making sure you optimize your front-end workflows to use as much automation as possible for competitions so that you can hire the guy who's a great hand illustrator to do some super cool rendering, or maybe you can hire more people to do more renderings, or whatever it is, the aspects that you are thinking about that can really help with that. It's gonna really make a big difference. Things. So now let's get into some of more of the specifics. One thing to consider is that all input is error. So anytime someone has to type something in, they're probably going to be, you're gonna make a mistake. People just make mistakes, that's how they work. So you wanna think about what are the things that we can do where we require people to not type things in. So that could be something like a database for what the current codes are for your location so that you're not copying from one project to the next, because sometimes people make mistakes. So you don't want to copy things over and over again that are incorrect. Like make sure maybe you have a detail library, determine like what is the details for these walls that would work the best in all situations. So for example, some firms now, instead of having a different wall assembly for each code minimum assembly and all the different locations that they might practice, and they pick the highest one, the best one, and then they just make that the standard so that there's less maybe older details in their detail database. So that's a great example of a way that you could improve the accuracy of your drawings, or the reduce some time by having people have a familiar set of standards that they work around. Another thing too is think about how much time each person is spending on a task, and instead of disrupting all the employees to do some big survey, which most people interpret as some kind of effort that's going to amount to nothing, so they don't all respond. Instead, try to find the people who are the most progressive in the office, who actually do want to change things and make it better, or project managers who are really keen and know how to actually manage the project and make money. Engage with those people, and you want to create some personas. So instead of having everyone in the firm, like I said, pick like the intern, the mid-career person, the principal, and your support staff, if they're all part of that process of whatever the thing is that you're trying to automate or buy a software for or something like that. And you want to identify what is the weak link in this process. What's the thing, because there's a lot of problems that could occur with different things that you're doing, or things that could be slow, but you don't want to pick things that are marginally more effective or less effective. So you want to find things that are going to be a big gain, like something that is such a big gain that it justifies the cost of the training, because that's the most, honestly, for most people, that's the thing that's going to be the biggest impediment. Is like, if we have to train a bunch of people, it takes a long time to train them on this thing, the marginal gain from that training won't be enough to offset it. And so it'll just be a loss, and people will be like, oh, we tried to do this technology thing, it didn't work, and why should we try the next time? So you really want to pick your poison, make sure that you're finding that weak link, something that's like really breaking a lot, and then really attack that and try to make that as less weak as possible until something else becomes a strong weak link, and then work on that next thing. So you want to progressively work on different aspects of your firm where too much human effort is being put in. Again, anything that doesn't fit the core design, that's not the expertise of architects. We're not data pushers by training, so we want to make sure that things we're doing are not pushing data around, because that to me is the antithesis of why we go to school, why we do all this getting licensed, why it takes so much effort. We're not doing all those things so we can manage data, we're doing it so that we can make beautiful, spectacular buildings. So really focus on that. Those are the things that are not paying the bills, because people are coming to you to check the codes, to provide your professional expertise, to find more creative solutions to the zoning of a property, or they want to get the building built for maybe cheaper with more utilization, or they want to figure out a way so that the fire code doesn't eliminate 3 or 4 units and add those units to the building if it's an apartment building, or maybe they're trying to design a net zero lab or something. So your expertise is what they're paying for. They're not, on some level, they want the project to be delivered, but they're really, when someone's coming to pay you for your professional services, they're wanting to get the thing that's special about you. So you really want to try to automate things that don't relate to that core competency. Research the technology solutions, find the things that already exist that do work. I think that's a super important thing that, a lot of times, you can't just rely on what you've seen in architectural record and the advertisements. You really need to dig a little deeper. So spending enough time to kind of like come up with a list of solutions for a particular thing you're trying to do. If that's project management software, if it's estimating software, sustainability software, BIM, data warehouse management, whatever you're trying to do, definitely make sure that you try to see at least 10 solutions in that space. For some things, obviously they're new and there's not a solution for that. But certainly, try to pick some of the representative things. Try to look beyond. Look at Twitter. Definitely look at LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is where a lot of the new technology is being showcased. Try to follow hashtags on like things like generative design or things on parametric workflows, things about computation and architecture. There's a lot of really cool young startups that are doing really amazing things. And a lot of times we just don't know about them because it's very hard to reach such a diffuse industry. For example, in my company, we have an entire team of people that spends time just finding architects and talking to them, because like a lot of times you may know something from 5 years ago, but something 5 months ago has totally reinvented the field. So make sure that you really go out there, find categories, sometimes just doing an image search based on a certain thing. There's a lot of really interesting Australian companies doing amazing stuff in the building space. TechCrunch could be a great source for that. So there are startups out there and that are being funded by venture capital, things like that. So you really want to kind of find what's the new big thing that's coming in addition to maybe some of the more traditional solutions that you would have looked to in the past. So definitely don't limit yourself to one particular company. Look around, see what you got out there. So you want to make a list of those different things. And then you're trying to come up with a report card or a grading system or a rating method to figure out, given what I'm trying to do, what are the things that are most important. So, you're trying to create like a rubric. So you say like, okay, I have this tool has this feature, I'm going to list that. And then I see if all the other ones have that feature that I really need. And so you want to identify, there's of course going to be many features that every software or solution or workflow or whatever it is that you're doing, there's something that you really, really need from that workflow or that particular software. And you want to try to think about like, what is it that I actually need? Because they might do a lot. So try to make columns and grade them. Grade them on a scale of 1 to 5 is usually easier to make a more informed kind of like rating system. Some people do 1 to 10, but 1 to 5 makes you have to commit to like something being really good or not really good, and rate each of those different features on each column, and then each row can be like a different thing that you're a different software solution or something like that. Then kind of identify what's those extra things that each one has, because maybe, in your practice, you haven't even thought about, some particular part of your process that this tool or another tool could help with. And so you can kind of start to identify which ones have that interesting solution there. Then you want to also look at the trajectory. So like, how fast have these companies been releasing features? What things are they doing to kind of like help you? How engaged are they? Do they have good support? Because honestly, a lot of times, like if you try to do everything yourself and figure out everything on your own, it can be super difficult to move the needle in a firm of people who are very stuck in their ways, let's say, about certain things. So you really want to really go for understanding what it is that that you can continue going on with them. So with that in mind, you can, once you've totaled up a score for each of those different companies and those different solutions, you want to pick the top 3. The top 3 solutions, try to go get some testing done. Pick those personas that we just talked about, your architect, your mid-career guy, your intern person, your principal, and get them all to test all 3 of those top solutions. That's how you take a task that could be overwhelming or it could be disruptive to the company, and you can kind of reduce it down. Do get the support and try to test how it works. Like, how does working with this company work? What kind of problems do I find, if any? And then just try to understand also the support level. So like also the documentation is going to be super helpful for reducing the amount of time that you spend in the actual implementation stage, getting everyone trained up. So with that in mind, definitely look for those data translation problems, things where you can't save from one thing to the next. Sometimes people make really flashy stuff that looks cool, but then you can't save it to the next format, or you can't connect it to another tool that you're using. So always try to see where are the inputs and where are the outputs, and list those things out explicitly for each tool so that you know kind of what you're dealing with, so there's no like gotchas or aha moments. And definitely try to do as many trials and stuff, but again, keep it to that core group, because you don't want too many cooks in the kitchen. If you have different experience levels, those people's opinions will be enough, more than enough, to make that heard. let's do a quick case study to see how this could work. So if you think about it, if you have to avoid one design revision per project team per year, that's about 80 to 120 hours of team time that you would be avoiding. That's a pretty achievable amount for some particular software solution that allows you to make better decisions. That could be anything from like, what kind of details to use, to maybe you avoid some kind of BIM rework on the back end, something like that. But so if we think about that, you can, instead of post-rationalizing what you're doing and trying to go back and fix things later, and if you can just anticipate a few changes early on, that's kind of like what you're looking for. So this particular software helps you do that, let's say. And then if you have a team of 3 junior designers, we can assume kind of a standard billing rate of about $75 per hour, and 1 licensed architect that oversees them costs about $150 an hour. Obviously, if you're doing your own projects, you might want to use your own numbers, things like that. But we can save up to $45,000 per design revision avoided if you kind of use this as a benchmark. And so that can really help you when you're considering how much a software costs, or you can really look at that and use that as kind of your measuring rod. And then let's say we have a firm of like a small firm, like 10 people, 7 licensed, 3 licensed. So this is really great for some of those small firms out there that are working on this kind of thing. If we're assuming about 2.4 multiplier on those wages, which is pretty common, and if you're interested in how to calculate your own multiplier, if you've never done that, definitely refer to the AIA's Handbook on Professional Practice. It's a really great resource. I highly recommend reading that and making sure that your firm is running optimally. That's a really good way to look into that. But let's assume those 10 people, 7 licensed, 3 licensed, and if we're charging, again, that $75 an hour, $150 an hour for the licensed folks, we can come out with an hourly firm burn rate of $825 an hour. So knowing your firm hourly burn rate is also super helpful if you're also, again, trying to understand, does this software make us more profitable? A lot of people don't go through and calculate that, but that's something super good to know. And if you have 30 projects, and let's say you avoided 1 major design revision per project, that would be 3 weeks of project time. The total operational savings for your firm could be close to $100,000 a year just by using that software. So if you know that by going through the training and kind of the net add is $100K in profitability, that can be a good enough reason to buy something that's maybe like $2,000, $3,000, even $10,000. It can really make sense. And so then if we kind of look at, let's say if we're factoring about 40 hours a week for 52 weeks a year, the gross revenue of this example firm that we're talking about, 10 folks, the company should be making about 1.7 million a year in terms of the billable work that they're making. That's kind of assuming a 90% utilization rate, which is basically 90% of your time is going to actually doing billable work and 10% is just overhead, training, things like that. Then if you kind of put in the cost of those people working, you should be making a pretty good profit each year. So you should be making about $361,000 in net profit if you kind of add up all the different costs of your junior staff, your licensed architects, unlicensed people. The cost of all that should be about $845,000 a year. So if you're kind of doing that math, it's all about the math, knowing the numbers of what it costs you to do your business. You can kind of come up with what you should be making. And then from that, if we look at it and we say if we avoided 1 design revision per project per year, we could be anywhere between 20 to 30% more profitable as an architecture firm. And not only that, of course, if you were using some kind of automation, maybe you could do more project pitches, and so then you would win even more work. So that's an example of kind of doing a quick fall through of how you would be able to use a particular technology solution to take you from barely making it to really making good money. And then, of course, you could pay people more, you could give bonuses, and then that would really help with once you have those different personas and everybody's training, everybody's looking at those different things, you want to maybe set up a month where you don't want to take too much time away from the people who are making you money, obviously. So go through and test each of those 3 software programs and do one every, if there's 4 weeks in a month. Try to do one per week so that you can actually test all of them when they're close together. Pick a project, pick a workflow, and use some kind of consistent process. I always recommend that people pick an existing project, something that they've already done. Like if you try to wait for a project to come, it can get really difficult to test things on an apples to apples comparison and make sure that you're really thinking through the problem in an objective way. Because sometimes maybe one tool works better with one workflow and another one with another project. And so you really want to make sure that you're like doing an apples to apples comparison, because again, you want to rate each of these different experiences. You really want to rate each one of these different experiences on a scale of like 1 to 5. Again, try to use data to guide your thinking, because it is difficult when you are thinking about doing something different in your firm. There's going to be a lot of questions about that. Why did you make those choices? Definitely want to do all your homework. From each of the different teams that are evaluating, make sure they're using some kind of unified framework. Have the same team evaluate all the different solutions. And again, going back to those personas, you want to make sure that you have a really wide range of representation. This is actually similar to how they set the test for the AIA for your architecture licensing exam. They actually have like different personas. They have the professor, they have the long practicing architect, the young architect, they try to pick all these different personas of different people, and that's how they create an unbiased assessment of what should be in the test. In a similar situation like this, we're trying to figure out what's going to be the right setup. Then another kind of way to go about thinking about this is then, okay, now we've identified the solution, now we're going to purchase it. Of course, anytime you try to change something in an organization, of course, the bigger it is, the bigger ship, takes a little bit longer to turn. There's what they call institutional momentum. So that's the number one reason why a lot of technology doesn't get adopted in firms, is just that institutional momentum is keeping you from being able to move forward. Maybe it's a great solution. A lot of times because of poor technology implementations in the past, people will be naturally resistant in many firms to adding something because they've heard the hype, they've heard it all before. But if you originally, in the other times that you've tried to do something, haven't followed a very rigorous process for vetting software before people are asked to use it, or not really coming up with what is the process, then of course their skepticism is warranted. So to overcome that institutional momentum where you're trying to pull people into your vision of what you're trying to do, you definitely want to think about, okay, how are we going to convince all those naysayers, the saboteurs, the people that are like, yeah, we've seen it all before. Usually there's a very good reason why project managers are not wanting to adopt something. It's because they know how to make money and they know how to make a profit with the current process that they're following. And they don't want to jeopardize that or their bonuses or things like that. So what you really want to do is, it's because their pay is incentivizing them to continue doing things the exact same way that they've been doing them all along. And that trying something new could definitely be a problem if your pay is connected to the profitability of a project. So with that in mind, it's better to, in many cases, to adopt kind of an overall firm, we call them KPIs in the whole startup industry, which is basically like your performance indicators that say like, if you make this many calls, if you do this much coding, or if you do this, you'll make X amount more. Or one of the things that we found super effective is if you connect people's pay, of course their base salary, but then also whatever bonuses they get to how much more profitable the company is. And that's not something that's maybe available to all architecture firms, but it's certainly something to think about, because ultimately, why wouldn't you want to pay an intern $60K if they can make you $120K more in profit just by being a little bit more motivated? If you are paying them like $45K a year, and because they're being overworked, they're not as productive or something like that, and you really need to think about always like how you incentivize people in the actual company does determine a lot of how productive they are. So the productivity isn't a function of working more hours. That actually, the more you work, the more your productivity declines. So definitely trying to come up also too with ways to incentivize people to use technology is to reduce their hours and then ask them to do more automation. That's when you start making serious money as an architecture firm. A lot of the big firms now, they have been doing that, and that's how they're consistently able to deliver better profits than maybe somebody who's using a more inefficient process. Certainly it could get better, and that's why we're having this conversation here. But at the end of the day, employing, automating things, reducing hours, those are all super important ways of doing that. So buy-in. So let's kind of like break that down, because no matter how much research you did, no matter how much of a framework that you had for creating this process, if nobody buys into it, obviously that's not a good thing, which is what we've been talking about. So explain why the process change is necessary. You want to do that with the most senior people first. So people have egos, and you want to make sure that those egos are recognized. People also have reasons they've done things before. You need to understand what those reasons are as a collective, hear everyone out, and then explain why the process change is necessary. That's really, really important. And show them your homework. Show all the things that you did in this evaluation. Show them how you scored things. Go through the scoring system. Go through like why you made the choices that you made. Don't say it's just the best one, or I liked it, or Jim thought it was great. No offense to Jim, but make sure that everyone feels comfortable about this solution, and that whatever it is that you've done is something that everybody can think about. So you really want to then, when you're doing this feedback session, start with, of course, the more senior people first, but you also want to solicit feedback from each of the different persona types. So in addition to the small team that you originally assembled to evaluate things, then you want to go to each of the different groups, but separate the groups by persona. So you don't want to like mix principals with interns, because an intern or a young professional is not going to feel comfortable about voicing their true opinion in front of their superiors. So try to make the buy-in happen at each of the different levels in the company, and really get into understanding the pros and cons, what they see as a problem, so that you do get a true sense of what you're going to do, what the consequences are for each person. Everybody feels like they've been heard, and that their feedback is going to be a part of things. So definitely do that. Then the next step in the process is to, they're going to give you some real problems with what you've come up with. Make sure that you address those and overcome them, but also, again, explain why it's important and why it's happening. If you're a senior principal and you've just, you've been able to make the choice, obviously there's some aspect that you just tell people, this is what's happening, this is what we're doing. So definitely make sure that you do that, but also try to listen and find out what those things are. Identify the people who are going to be saboteurs on the team. Very rarely are people difficult because they want to be difficult. They're difficult because they see some other thing that maybe you haven't seen. So try to understand where they're coming from. Ask them to document, if they do have an objection, document why they have that objection. A lot of times also people tend to have certain opinions, or maybe things that they learned when they were an intern, or when something like that. Like learned knowledge that we carry forward from the past does not age well in many cases. Sometimes it does. That's where wisdom comes from. But other things are like conventional wisdom can be wrong about, especially when it comes to technology. So, if it didn't work in the past, it could be actually working now. But again, you want to uncover those difficult things, find those people, make sure you apply the training to the people who are the most difficult. Because someone who's a real curmudgeon, if they get training, they actually understand, they get buy-in, those people are going to be your best advocates for change within the firm. So you really want to make sure you get those people. Obviously, some people don't want to change, that's okay. But you really want to try to dig into why people think the things that they think, and make sure that you provide more resources to those who are afraid of change. Some people are just afraid. Other people are married to a certain technology or solution that they advocated for in the past. You want to make sure that they feel like this new thing that we're doing is no way a poor reflection on any previous decisions that we've made in terms of technology. That's a really important thing to keep in mind. Definitely too, as I talked about before, the tying of the bonus structure to the productivity gains will always tend to reinforce these decisions. And another thing you can do to really help juice the adoption of technology is, if it's a change in process, make sure that the approval of each pay application submitted to the accounting department is reflected by you don't get it approved if you didn't do this process. So for example, if you just needed to report your EUI for energy use intensity for every project, you want to make sure that, like, if that is the case, that you want that to happen, connect it to the pay application so that when the project manager submits that to get paid, they also have to submit the EUI. That incentivization of the process will really help make sure that everyone is on board and doing the same thing, even if they're not on board at first. It becomes habit, and that habit becomes a part of what you're doing, which then makes you less likely to make mistakes and so on. So those are the things that you want to try to, as much as possible, lock in the reporting, how you do things, so that it's not like someone is not telling them what to do. It's just a part of the workflow. So for example, if a project manager knows that doing something's important, he should be getting those metrics from his junior employees who report to him, and then that project manager should report to the next higher up person, who should report back to you if you're the principal. But it shouldn't be that you have to ask them to do that every day. The more you can make it so that it's you have daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly goals around a certain technology adoption workflow or a way of being more productive, you really want to make sure that the reporting of that information doesn't require active involvement from you. It comes back, whether that's going to be in a spreadsheet, on a Slack channel. Using Slack is a really great way to boost internal productivity, but everybody just posting those numbers, what are we doing, how are we measuring it, being able to measure and actively report that, and connecting that back to pay, performance, bonuses, really, really helps people stay focused on what's important and kind of unify the firm towards a certain technology adoption. So it's not so much you must do this, it's more well, you want to get paid more, do this. It kind of really helps. And you'll be amazed, I know that we've seen, we 5x'd and 2x'd our businesses at various points just by using a more incentivized pay structure. Certainly, maybe that's outside the realm of what most people think about, but it can have an enormous impact on your firm. One of the most important things about creating organizational change is that you want to publicly report how well you're doing on those things. So, we've all seen a factory and they got the little number that says this many days since an accident happened. That is actually a really great way of helping people form a collective idea around compliance, around safety. In the factory case, but in an architecture firm, it could be their 2030 score, how well you're doing from an energy standpoint. You can have that publicly posted on the website. If it's bad, you must post it. And if it's good, you must post it, so that people know that the world also is holding us accountable to this, not just ourselves. And that can be a super powerful driver to continue making that change. And then really promote and celebrate when people do hit the metrics. So if people are doing the things and they're doing the stuff that you want, make sure that they're celebrating internal emails. Sometimes there's a tendency in architecture firms to celebrate design over everything else. Make sure that if you have set technology goals and objectives, that you are celebrating those collectively in the office and externally. So that's kind of my playbook for how to really bring technology, to evaluate technology, to implement it in your firm. I really hope that this session so far has been interesting. I'd really like to, as I get off this kind of more presentation mode, if we could all have a conversation about things around this. I'd love to take questions. Maybe we can start off with a few questions, but definitely let's get into that. Let's think through it. Let's think about all the different things, and maybe form a much better framework going forward in the future in your firm around how to actually achieve true productivity and make your architecture firm super profitable and able to deliver projects on time and under budget. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And with that, let's start off with some questions. Thank you.